what's up, everyone? Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I'm back today with another client interview for you guys. Today, I'm really excited to have Emilio on with us. Emilio is one of our super amazing clients who has actually been with us for a while, but he a couple months ago finished his junior summer internship recruiting process and had a very phenomenal outcome. And so I wanted to get him on here to talk about just his whole experience recruiting and how it was like for him. And hopefully, he'll be able to also shed some insight for you guys that you'll be able to benefit from as well. So, Amelia, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today.
Hey, no, thanks to you, Sam. Really honored to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just checked right before we started this interview, but, we're 2 days away from 2 days away from your 2-year anniversary in Wall Street Mastermind, actually. So I feel like I've known you forever.
Yeah,
Um,
kind of crazy how quick time goes by.
yeah, and a lot has obviously happened during that time too. But if we can, before we dive into all that, if you can just maybe introduce yourself real quick and give people kind of a sense of who you are.
Yeah, so a quick rundown on me. My name is Emilio. Uh, and when I first got interested in investment banking and just finance in general, I had such a different idea, of what investment banking was and what the finance industry was, right? You get this weird point of view just from movies and culture and everything, but once I actually got reading more into M&A deals and equity offerings and so on and so forth, I just kind of became really fascinated with this whole world of huge transactions, helping companies, with all sorts of different things and just kind of being that go-to advisor for whenever a company, needs to make a big acquisition or needs to issue bonds or needs to issue stock. And I really figured that this was going to be the thing for me.
Nice. And so, like, how early did you kind of figure out that investment banking is the career that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, well, in terms of how early it was, I would say there were maybe a couple of steps. When I first read about investment banking and got interested in it, I was definitely considering it as an option. I hadn't still cemented myself, down this route. Uh, but as I went, through the Wall Street Mastermind program, and as I read more and more and became more acquainted with the industry and, the big impact that it has on society and just everything that stems out from it, uh, my viewpoint kind of began changing. And, I went further and further along the path. And, I decided, hey, this is really what I want to do. And, that's when I decided that investment banking was going to be my career.
So was that freshman year for you or sophomore year or
Yeah. And in terms of years, I would say it was probably in freshman year.
got it? Okay. And so obviously you watched some movies, read some books, done a little bit of research on your own, but um, prior to coming to Wall Street Mastermind, how much did you kind of try to do on your own from like a recruiting standpoint in terms of whether it's networking or preparation or just, whatever you feel like was relevant to this goal of yours? Like, what were you doing at the time and how was that going for you?
Yeah. Well, in terms of what I was doing at the time, I would divide it into two camps. Typically there's, more of always a behavioral component and, a technical component. Uh, in terms of my technicals, I had kind of gotten started on learning some of them, learning kind of how the time value of money works, how valuation multiples work, some of the different valuation methodologies like trading comps and precedent transactions and so on and so forth. Uh, but I would say that the experience that I had with that was mostly, really to the book, textbook sort of stuff. It wasn't like if you were to ask me what trading comps were, what a DCF was, I would give you like this really drawn out 10-minute, 15-minute answer, kind of going through everything. But at the end of the day, it's not really practical, right? If you're ever asked a question about one of these in an interview, you're not going to go on a rant about it. So that was one on the technical side. On the behavioral side, I kind of fell into that trap that I've noticed a lot of students fall into, uh, wherein, they think that their behaviorals are just amazing, because they're just talking about themselves, and everyone loves to talk about themselves, right? So I'm like, hey, like I'm good at talking to people. I have a relatively interesting story. I should be fine. So that was all before, like started the program. But as I went through the program, kind of got a feeling for all the little nuances and all the ways that bankers kind of expect your interview answers to be like. uh, I realized that I was way wrong. Like I really needed to do a lot of work on, what I had before. And, that's exactly what the program helped me with. I would email Sam with questions, asking him like, hey, how should I phrase this so that it's not too wordy and I'm hitting all the points I need to make? you know how do I really empathize with this interviewer without maybe sounding like I'm super, I don't know, like pushy, or there's a lot of little nuances and things that are really difficult to learn about just reading.
Yeah.
You actually need someone who went through this whole process, who can kind of give you pointers as to like, oh, when you're starting off your networking call, first kind of like start talking about the your story and maybe like the banker story, ask a couple questions, then maybe move on to questions about the actual group that they're in, then do questions about like the actual internship, right? It really lays out a structure that accounts for all these little nuances, that at the end of the day, if you understand these little nuances, that's going to be what differentiates you and is going to end up getting you the offer.
Right. Right. That makes sense. So then I guess like what made you even want to join something like Wall Street Mastermind in the first place? Like, did you already have resources at school? Did you feel like, sounds like you were already doing a lot of prep on your own? Did you for some reason feel like that wasn't sufficient? Or because I understand like obviously after you came into the program and then you learn the stuff that we taught you, you realize, oh wow, there's a lot of stuff that I was doing that I could have been doing better. But prior to that step though, there had to be something that caused you to even want to come into the program in the first place, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess in terms of the resources at my school, I'm really fortunate that I go to the school where, we send a good amount of people to investment banking every year, especially to like New York offices for a lot of the big boutiques and bulge bracket banks. So in terms of, learning all my technicals and, learning the more theoretical aspect of a lot of things, those resources were there. My mentality when I decided to join Wall Street Mastermind, this kind of stems a little bit more from how I am as a person. I typically, whenever I'm really interested in something, I try to get as much information as possible from all sorts of people, right? But it's really hard just because a lot of the information that you find online, you know, especially when you go to forums or, whatever, a lot of the people that are talking there, you don't really know who they are, if they're, legit, you don't really know, like, if they're just college students or whatever ranting about it, or if they're actually, like professionals. And I wanted to get a really unbiased perspective from someone who had worked, in investment banking, who had conducted interviews, and again, I'm really fortunate to have a school with a lot of alums in investment banking, but it's also different, when you're kind of networking, because there's going to be sometimes questions that might seem a little bit tedious, or sorry for like with the wording, but like if you ask an analyst or an associate that you networked with, a question over email and it's like a stupid question, like that can come back to harm you and that can reflect bad on you, right? But if you ask Sam and it's, I don't know, like 2 in the morning and you just did like a module and you have a really stupid question, or you need a really quick answer, like Sam's willing to be there and he's going to be unbiased and he's going to be, hey, like I think you should do this, or I think you shouldn't do this, or I think you should do that. And that's really valuable, having that big brother like advice, with you all the time.
Yeah. I guess like basically you're right, because you can network with bankers and try to get them to help you, and some of them will help you sometimes, especially if they like you. But at the end of the day, there's still a limit as to how often you can ask them questions, because they're very busy and you don't want to be annoying. And also, you're still trying to impress them. So, that saying like there's no such thing as a stupid question. Well, in front of someone you're trying to impress, there is such a thing as a stupid question, right? Whereas I guess with us, instead of Wall Street Mastermind, it's kind of a safe space where you can ask whatever you want and it doesn't really matter. We're here to help you and no one's really going to judge you for it, right? Whereas this is like a low stakes environment for you to like just go out and get the answers that you need. So I think
Exactly.
that's a really, really good point. And that's probably like a good segue too, because the other thing that I'm sure a lot of people are curious about, and this is, I don't know if I want to call it like a criticism, but like something that a lot of people out there say is like, you know, you should be able to do all of this on your own, right? Like all the information that you already need is already out there. Like you can Google stuff, you can use the 400 questions guide, especially like someone like you, if you go to a target school and there's a bunch of alumni already, or there's like school clubs, which you're in a bunch of these clubs too as well, right? It's not like you're not involved on campus. So like, what what was it that you got out of Wall Street Mastermind that you felt like you couldn't get from any of these other places? Or like, because otherwise it's just, I mean, it's just a waste of money, right? To pay for something like this, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, the biggest value in this was, worth every penny that I paid for Wall Street Mastermind, was kind of having an already established uniform system, you know, uh, on how to do pretty much everything that you need to do, right? So in terms of, reading the 400 question guides or anything on like mergers and inquisitions or breaking into Wall Street or Wall Street Oasis or any of the other, online resources, those are great. They're definitely interesting to read. I read them. Uh, but and they're great for understanding, all the different topics and everything. But especially for some of the more behavioral questions, my personal opinion is that, you know, even though they give you a formula on how to answer some of these questions, they might not necessarily, that formula might not necessarily cater well to your individual case, right? And everyone's story is different, everyone is a different person. And so really having that personalized, advice, that your program provides, is really helpful, while at the same time, it's personalized for each individual, but it's also, based off this tried and tested structure that you've, tried and tested with hundreds of people by now. So, what works, what doesn't work. But then you also know, out of the things that a person might have in their strengths or their weaknesses, how do you, better show the strengths, and how do you maybe try and lay off the weaknesses and improve them, right? So in terms of that, I would say that was definitely worth it. And you can spend all the time that you want, trying to research everything on your own. But at the end of the day, right, you know, you also have to worry about your grades. You also have to worry about networking and having a lot of, time for that. You also, typically want to have things outside of school and work, like family and social life. And so having everything kind of, in one place where you kind of get a breakdown of everything, like it is like the case with a Wall Street mastermind where everything's kind of already set up for you. That's really valuable.
Got it. So basically, if I were to really summarize what you said, it's primarily two things. One is just a personalization aspect of it. Like, for example, when people say, all the information is already out there, I don't know, pick whatever you mentioned formulas, like pick whatever formulas, like use the STAR method to answer your behavioral questions. Like everybody knows you should use the STAR method, right? But then it's like, in addition to just using the STAR method, if I told 10 different people to use the STAR method, they'll probably come up with 10 totally different answers of totally different qualities, right? And then it's like, once you get to that point, how do you know if what you've come up with is actually good or not, right? It's like there's too much room for self interpretation, almost, where you're judging your own performance, and that's not typically the best way to go about it, because just like you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, is like you used to think that your behavioral answers were really, really good. And then once we worked on it and gave you feedback and we made all these changes to it, you realize how much better your behavioral answers actually could still become, right? But those are oftentimes, like, those improvements are oftentimes things that you would have never been able to identify on your own, because if you could have, then you would have already done it, right? And that's where, like, having an extra set of, like, really experienced extra set of eyes that's like really experienced in what you're trying to do, like that can just take your game to the next level, basically.
Yeah, definitely agree with that, especially when it's an unbiased set of extra eyes, someone that, if things might not be like super good the first time around, someone like you is going to be unbiased and is going to tell me, they're going to be, typically when I ask for advice, I always like to ask, I don't know if I should say this, but like I like to ask the meaner people for advice. This isn't the case with you, but this is just like my case in life, because typically, like, those are the people that aren't going to tell you how much of a superstar you are and how wonderful you are, but they're going to tell you the things where you're lacking. And, the things where you're lacking, that's where you're going to improve, right? And then going back to the other point, with you, you're going to be unbiased, right? You're an awesome guy. I really loved working with you. But the great thing about working with you is that you're going to be unbiased. Like, you're going to tell me this is good, this is bad, this can be improved, cut this off, right? And that's really important. If you go to a senior in your school for advice, they might try and tell you, oh, your answers were wonderful, and go on for like 5 minutes about how great you are. And then at the end, that's not really going to help you,
Right.
right? You're in the same square you were before. And
Yeah.
so I just think that's really valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's even that. Like, sometimes, your older friends, they're not sure. Sometimes they just don't want to hurt your feelings, I think, because you guys are friends. But also, sometimes it's not that they're trying to do that, but it's just that maybe they genuinely do think that your answers are pretty good, and maybe they genuinely don't. Because again, they're maybe a little bit more experienced than you are, but they're not that much more experienced.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the things that you're missing or you don't see, they might not see it either, right? And so it's just like, the analogy I usually make is, if you're studying to become a doctor, you go to med school, are you going to try to learn how to perform surgery from, a second year resident, or are you going to try to learn how to do surgery from, like, a really experienced doctor who's been operating for 10, 15, 20 years, right? Like, it's a totally different thing, right? So I think that's a really good point. And the other point that you had brought up was just like, really, it's about efficiency, right? Like, nobody is saying, oh my God, you cannot recruit on your own. And if you do, then you have no chance at breaking into investment banking. Obviously, plenty of people um, have done the whole thing on their own, right? But a lot more people have tried it on their own and then run out of time, right? Like we know, especially nowadays with just the recruiting timeline happening earlier and earlier every single year, is getting to the point where honestly it's kind of ridiculous. And I feel bad for you guys who are the ones that have to go through it. But like, you just don't have a lot of time. You just don't have a lot of time to learn all the things you need to learn. Like we've been talking a lot about, developing your behavioral stories, but also learning all the technical concepts and building up your resume and getting multiple internships and joining the clubs at school and keeping up your grades and, like you said, having a social life because you're a college student. Like to fit all of that into the 24 hours that you have in a day, like there's just a lot of different demands that you have, right? And they're all pulling in different directions. So if there's a way to kind of just like streamline a lot of the things that you have to do, where you don't have to second guess if you're doing it the right way, you don't have to trial and error, you can just, like, okay, this is the playbook. You still got to do the work, and it's still a lot of work, right? I mean, how hard did you have to
Yeah.
work for this offer? I'm not saying like it was just handed to you or something. Like you still got to do the work, but at least you save time from not having to like redo stuff because you did it wrong the first time or something like that. It's just
Yeah.
like,
It's like if you were lost in the woods, right? You know, normally in the scenario, in one scenario, you're lost and you don't have a map. You're just kind of walking around circles, trying to see different landmarks. It's going to take you a lot longer, to get out. Whereas in this case, when you have something like your program, that has a structure to it, that's kind of like if you were lost in the woods, but you had a map,
yeah,
right?
you still got to hike. You still got to take the hike, but at least you're taking a straight line from point A to point B versus, zigzagging your way across the mountain or whatever, right? Which is
Yeah.
going to be much longer, if you ever get there at all, right?
Mhm.
No, that's a great analogy. So, I guess aside from the interview aspect, like what else did you find helpful about the program? Like, what about, in terms of that, we talked a lot about interview preparation. What about like getting the interview, like even getting selected for interviews? Like, was there anything on that side that you felt like really made a difference for you?
Yeah, it's actually really good that you bring that up. I would say that's probably one of the things that most helped me in the program was being able to first to schedule like coffee chats on the phone, but then to really learn to be able to make a good impression in a lot of these coffee chats, right? Because if you really think about it, I know I did a couple of coffee chats before I joined the program. They were pretty informal, and looking back on some of those, it's kind of cringy, you know, how I did them, then how I had my conversation with people that I was speaking with over the phone.
Yeah.
um I thought I was like being super interesting, being a great conversation partner, but like look, that was back then. Looking back on it now, I realized I was just kind of talking about myself. I wasn't really giving them a chance to talk. uh and so what Wall Street Mastermind teaches you is kind of like a structure for a lot of these coffee chats. you know Typically they tend to be anywhere from 20, 25, 30 minutes, and you want to make sure you hit some certain key points along the way. And so I remember in your program you kind of like divided into 5 sections, right? Like the introduction,
Yep.
then you talk about, I don't know, like you talk about your why investment banking. You tell me about yourself, a more condensed version. Then you talk about maybe like the group, uh, and then you talk about maybe like the actual internship itself, and then at the end you kind of leave the space for like any last questions. And so having that structure already set in place, that's worked for a lot of people. what types of questions are good to ask, what type of questions, you should shy away from. That's really valuable because that's going to save you a lot of mistakes. And especially when you're networking, if you make one or two mistakes, that person might not like you as much. So it's really important to try and limit how many mistakes you make
Yeah.
so you can really be efficient and, do well in terms of getting interviews.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, because if we think about it, I think networking ended up being really crucial for you, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, even towards the end, like, I mean, I know you got more than one offer, but like the offer that you really wanted, that you ultimately ended up accepting, um, you had a lot of help from one of the bankers in that group, one of the senior bankers in that group, and that probably only happened because you did a good job networking with them to the point where he was like really strongly pulling for you, basically behind the scenes, basically, right?
Yeah, definitely. And in my opinion, I would say, networking is, right up there with the interviews in terms of importance, if not more important. If you're able to make a good impression on people from the start, that's going to be really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and then like along the way, obviously, you're trying to, just like most of our clients, like you're trying to build up your resume and make it as impressive as possible and add relevant experiences to it and whatnot. Um, how was that process, and like how were you able to go about that, and like what kind of experiences were you able to get along the way to kind of like make
Yeah,
it
so
into a more attractive candidate?
yeah, I was really fortunate along the way that I was able to get some great experiences, both in terms of extracurriculars and also in terms of internships. Before I accepted my most recent offer for junior summer. But in terms of extracurriculars, I was able to get in, uh, some of the top club. My school has this club where it basically organizes, these case study like projects with a lot of different banks. So I was able to be selected by some of the really, you know, uh, good banks that do these projects, get selected for their projects. And, these are the application only. They take maybe like 10 kids, 8 kids each semester, and there's a lot of people applying. So that in itself is a really, good achievement. And, a lot of it was down to, using all of your help. In terms of internships, I was able to leverage a lot of the experience that I got in these extracurricular projects and, find myself an internship at a large, international bank from Canada. And so that was kind of like my first internship, which, I think you mentioned this before in other interviews, like that first internship is typically the hardest one to get just because, it's your first one, you don't really have too much on your resume. Uh, but I was really fortunate to get that internship, had a great time, had a some great experience. And, I continued building up my resume. I got a great internship for my sophomore summer, at another bank. And now I'm headed, to Morgan Stanley for their tech group for junior summer. So it's, I was really fortunate to get a great offer.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I mean, you certainly put in a lot of work along the way, and you have, honestly, I think you have one of the, from an experience standpoint, you have one of the most stacked resumes out of a lot of the students that we've seen, right? Because, like you said, you had this school experiences where you're working with like actual top tier banks. Did multiple internships with also very reputable banks, including your sophomore summer, and even before that. And so I think that's all, big props to you for kind of putting in the work to getting those very selective opportunities, which obviously then helps you stand out from the rest of your competition as well, right?
Yeah.
So like you said, you're going to uh, MS Tech, which my alma mater, so they have a special place in my heart. But I'm happy to say that even, geez, I guess now it's been what, more than 10 years since I left the place, but they're still one of the. I think they're still one of the top groups you can end up at on the street because first of all, it's in tech, which I think was one of the best coverage groups to be in. But I'm biased, but I just think tech is one of the most exciting places to be. And within tech, obviously, they're one of the top dogs with GS, and maybe you can throw Catalyst in there, right? So, how are you feeling about that outcome? Like, was that kind of what you wanted the entire time, or how do you feel afterwards?
Yeah, well, super excited with that outcome. Was really fortunate, to get the offer from them. And yeah, like I mentioned before, a lot of it was down to your help and, putting in the work and doing everything. But, at the end of the day, I'm really fortunate to be where I am right now.
That's awesome, man. Um, and it's crazy. That group is crazy, as in like a lot of the senior bankers that used to be my boss, they're still there. They're just, back when I was there, they have been there for like 20 plus years already, and now they've been there for 30 plus years. Um, and the people on that team, they just don't really ever leave because it's such a great team. So really happy for you that you're joining that team. I guess as just one last thing while we have you here, any parting word of advice for our listeners? Like, maybe something that you wish people had told you back when you first started recruiting that would have helped you tremendously, that you now know in hindsight. Like, is there anything like that that you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, if there's one thing I think is really important that I wish I would have known in hindsight, uh, I would probably say that you genuinely try and connect with people. The people who end up getting these job offers, even the people who end up applying to, investment banks for their internships and for full-time opportunities, you know, they're all obviously very intelligent, right? So you're dealing with some tough competition. And I'm pretty sure almost everyone, if they're taught how to do the job and how to build a M&A model or how to build a pitch book deck, I'm sure almost everyone would do a great job. But at the end of the day, the people that actually end up getting the offers and the people that tend to, do really well in this industry and, in things like, in banking and things like this are the ones that are really able to connect well with others. That, they're willing to be that happy person at the office that kind of lifts everyone up. That person that the seniors, ask for when they're, when they're staffing on deals, right? That person that's going to be dependable, hardworking, but also just the type of person that they might want to go out and, grab drinks with or hang out with outside of work. So that's really important. And I know you definitely touch a lot on that, especially like in the networking and the behavioral modules. So, I feel like that's understated a little bit, especially like among students. There's this culture that kind of, makes everyone think that the people that are going to the top banks are all, like these super geniuses that know their technical guide backwards and forwards, right? But, you know, it's more along the lines of, just being able to connect well with people.
Yeah.
And that's not only just for like investment banking recruiting, that's, for your finance career in general. And so it's really important, and you teach this, you preach this to get good at building relationships, because at the end of the day, that's probably one of the most important skills.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and you hit the nail on the head, which is at the end of the day, it's a people's business, right? And you're going to spend a lot of time at work with your colleagues, 80, 90, 100 hours a week. And if you're not a likable person, no one's going to want to work with you for that long, right? Like they're going to see you more than they see their family, basically, right? So
Yeah.
um,
Definitely.
cannot cannot overstate the importance of just being one of the guys, right? So anyway, that's great advice. So look, guys, like for those of you who are still listening, if you're kind of, find yourself in a similar situation where, you've been preparing on your own, um, but you feel like something's maybe still missing, or you feel like it's kind of difficult to get really good feedback on what you're doing and whether it's as good as it should be, and you're looking for just the most efficient way to go about this because let's be honest, you're super busy as a college student and there's not a whole lot of time recruiting, and you want some help with that, then I want to invite you to book a free strategy session with our team. You can do that by going to www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply, and the street's abbreviated. So it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And what we'll do on this call is, someone on our team will speak to you, learn more about your situation with recruiting. What are your goals? What are your challenges? What do you actually feel like you need help with? And then based on what you tell us, we'll try to come up with a customized game plan for you. Because like Emilio said, all of this has to be personalized. And, if for some reason we don't think we can help you, which does happen sometimes, then even in that scenario, we'll at least give you some advice on just what we think you should do. And so, either way, you'll walk away from this call with some valuable information. All right. So, if you want to do that, go ahead and book that call, and we look forward to speaking with you. And with that said, Emilio, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. Again, this was, really insightful, and huge congrats on joining MS Tech. Again, I'm biased, but I think it's one of the best groups on the street, and I'm sure you have a great experience there. And I can't wait to see all the success that you have ahead of you, man.
Oh, thanks, Sam. Appreciate you letting me hop into this call. Really grateful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun. So, and I know we'll be talking soon, and so this is not goodbye, but uh, for our listeners, we'll be back soon with more of these client interviews for you guys in the near future. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.